Victory over Japan. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Speech given by Winston Churchill to the House of Commons, 16th August, 1945. Our duty is to congratulate His Majesty's government on the very great improvement in our prospects at home, which comes from the complete victory gained over Japan and the establishment of peace throughout the world. Only a month ago it was necessary to continue at full speed and at enormous cost all preparations for a long and bloody campaign in the Far East. In the first days of the Potsdam Conference, President Truman and I approved the plans submitted to us by the combined chiefs of staff for a series of great battles and landings in Malaya, in the Netherlands East Indies, and in the homeland of Japan itself. These operations involved an effort not surpassed in Europe, and no one could measure the cost in British and American life and treasure they would require. Still less could it be known how long the stamping out of the resistance of Japan in the many territories she had conquered, and especially in her homeland, would take. All the while, the whole process of turning the world from war to peace would be hampered and delayed. Every form of peace activity was half strangled by the overriding priorities of war. No clear-cut decisions could be taken in the presence of this harsh, dominating uncertainty. During the last 3 months, an element of barring dualism has complicated every problem of policy and administration. We had to plan for peace and war at the same time. Immense armies were being demobilized. Another powerful army was being prepared and dispatched to the other side of the globe. All the personal stresses among millions of men eager to return to civil life, and hundreds of thousands of men who would have to be sent to a new and severe campaigns in the Far East, presented themselves with growing tension. This dualism affected also every aspect of our economic and financial life. How to set people free to use their activities in reviving the life of Britain, and at the same time to meet the stern demands of the war against Japan, constituted one of the most perplexing and distressing puzzles that, in a long lifetime of experience, I have ever faced. I confess it was with great anxiety that I surveyed this prospect a month ago. Since then, I have been relieved of the burden. At the same time, that burden, heavy though it still remains, has been immeasurably lightened. On 17th July, there came to us at Potsdam the eagerly awaited news of the trial of the atomic bomb in the Mexican desert. Success beyond all dreams crowned this somber, magnificent venture of our American allies. The detailed reports of the Mexican desert experiment, which were brought to us every few days later by air, could leave no doubt in the minds of the very few who were informed that we were in the presence of a new factor in human affairs, and possessed of powers which were irresistible. Great Britain had a right to be consulted in accordance with Anglo-American agreements. The decision to use the atomic bomb was taken by President Truman and myself at Potsdam, and we approved the military plans to unchain the dread pent-up forces. From that moment our outlook on the future was transformed. In preparation for the results of this experiment, the statements of the President and of Mr. Stimson, and my own statement, which by the courtesy of the Prime Minister was subsequently read out on the broadcast, were framed in common agreement. Marshal Stalin was informed by President Truman that we contemplated using an explosive of incomparable power against Japan, and action proceeded in the way we all now know. It is to this atomic bomb, more to any other factor, that we may ascribe the sudden and speedy ending of the war against Japan. Before using it, it was necessary first of all to send a message in the form of an ultimatum to the Japanese which would apprise them of what unconditional surrender meant. This document was published on 26th July, the same day that another event, differently viewed on each side of the House, occurred. Note the result of the general election and the resignation of Churchill from the premiership. End note. The assurances given to Japan about her future after her unconditional surrender had been made were generous in the extreme. When we remembered the cruel and treacherous nature of the utterly unprovoked attack made by the Japanese warlords upon the United States and Great Britain, these assurances must be considered as magnanimous in a high degree. In a nutshell, they implied Japan, or the Japanese, and even access to raw materials, apart from their control, was not denied to their densely populated homeland. We felt that in view of the new and fearful agencies of war power about to be employed, every inducement to surrender, compatible with our declared policy, should be set before them. This we owed to our consciences before using this awful weapon. Secondly, by repeated warnings, emphasized by heavy bombing attacks, an endeavor was made to procure the general exodus of the civil population from the threatened cities. Thus everything in human power, prior to using the atomic bomb, was done to spare the civil population of Japan. There are voices which assert that the bomb should never have been used at all. I cannot associate myself with such ideas. 6 years of total war have convinced most people that had the Germans or Japanese discovered this new weapon, they would have used it upon us to our complete destruction with the utmost alacrity. I surprise that very worthy people, but people who in most cases had no intention of proceeding to the Japanese front themselves, should adopt the position that rather than throw this bomb, we should have sacrificed 1 million American and 250,000 British lives in the desperate battles and massacres of an invasion of Japan. Future generations will judge these dire decisions, and I believe that if they find themselves dwelling in a happier world from which war has been banished, and where freedom reigns, they will not condemn those who struggled for their benefit amid the horrors and miseries of this gruesome and ferocious epoch. The bomb brought peace, but men alone can keep that peace, and henceforward they will keep it under penalties which threaten the survival not only of civilization, but of humanity itself. I may say that I am in entire agreement with the President that the secrets of the atomic bomb should, so far as possible, not be imparted at the present time to any other country in the world. This is in no design or wish for arbitrary power, but for the common safety of the world. Nothing can stop the progress of research and experiment in every country, but although research will no doubt proceed in many places, the construction of the immense plants necessary to transform theory into action cannot be improvised in any country. For this, and for many other reasons, the United States stand at this moment at the summit of the world. I rejoice that this should be so. Let them act up to the level of their power and their responsibility, not for themselves, but for others, for all men in all lands, and then a brighter day may dawn upon human history. As far as we know, there are at least 3 or perhaps 4 years before the concrete progress made in the United States can be overtaken. In these years we must remold the relationships of all men, wherever they dwell, in all nations. We must remold them in such a way that these men do not wish or dare to fall upon each other for the sake of vulgar and outdated ambitions, or for passionate differences in ideology, and that international bodies of supreme authority may give peace on earth and decree justice among men. Our pilgrimage has brought us to a sublime moment in the history of the world. From the least to the greatest, all must strive to be worthy of these supreme opportunities. There is not an hour to be wasted. There is not a day to be lost. It would, in my opinion, be a mistake to suggest that the Russian declaration of war upon Japan was hastened by the use of the atomic bomb. My understanding with Marshal Stalin in the talks which I had with him had been, for a considerable time past, that Russia would declare war upon Japan within 3 months of the surrender of the German armies. The reason for the delay of 3 months was, of course, the need to move over the Trans-Siberian Railway the large reinforcements necessary to convert the Russian Manchurian army from a defensive to an offensive strength. 3 months was the time mentioned, and the fact that the German army surrendered on 8th May and the Russians declared war on Japan on 8th August is no mere coincidence, but another example of the fidelity and punctuality which with Marshal Stalin and his valiant armies have always kept their military engagements. I now turn to the results of the Potsdam Conference, so far as they have been made public in the agreed communiqué and in President Truman's very remarkable speech of a little more than a week ago. There has been general approval of the arrangements proposed for the administration of Germany by the Allied Control Commission during the provisional period of military government. This regime is both transitional and indefinite. The character of Hitler's Nazi Party was such as to destroy almost all independent elements in the German people. The struggle was fought to the bitter end. The mass of the people were forced to drain the cup of defeat to the dregs. A headless Germany has fallen into the hands of the conquerors. It may be many years before any structure of German national life will be possible, and there will be plenty of time for the victors to consider how the interests of world peace are affected thereby. In the meanwhile, it is in my view of the utmost importance that responsibility should be effectively assumed by German local bodies for carrying on, under Allied supervision, all the processes of production and of administration necessary to maintain the life of a vast population. It is not possible for the Allies to bear responsibility by themselves. We cannot have the German masses lying down upon our hands and expecting to be fed, organized, and educated over a period of years by the Allies. We must do our best to help to avert the tragedy of famine, but it would be in vain for us in our small island, which still needs the import half its food, to imagine how we can make any further appreciable contribution in that respect. The rationing of this country cannot be made more severe without endangering the life and physical strength of our people, all of which will be needed for the immense tasks we have to do. I therefore most strongly advise the encouragement of the assumption of responsibility by trustworthy German local bodies in proportion that they can be brought into existence. The council, which was set up at Potsdam, of the foreign secretaries of the 3, 4, or 5 powers, meeting in various combinations as occasion served, affords a new and flexible machinery for the continuous further study of the immense problems that lie before us in Europe and Asia. I am very glad that the request that I made to the conference that the seat of the Council's permanent secretariat should be London was granted. I must say that the late Foreign Secretary, Mr. Anthony Eden, who has over a long period gained an increasing measure of confidence from the Foreign Secretaries of Russia and the United States, and who, through the European Advisory Committee, which is located in London, has always gained the feeling that things could be settled in a friendly and easy way, deserves some of the credit for the fact that these great powers willingly accorded us the seat in London of the permanent secretariat. It is high time that the place of London, one of the controlling centers of international world affairs, should at last be recognized. It is the oldest, the largest, the most battered capital, the capital which was first in the war, and the time is certainly overdue when we should have our recognition. I am glad also that a beginning is to be made with the evacuation of Persia (Iran) by the British and Russian armed forces, in accordance with the triple treaty which we made with each other and with Persia in 1941. Although it does not appear in the communiqué, we have since seen it announced that the first stages in the process, namely the withdrawal of Russian and British troops from Tehran, has already begun or is about to begin. There are various other matters arising out of this conference which should be noted as satisfactory. We should not, however, delude ourselves into supposing that the results of the first conference of the victors were free from disappointment or anxiety, or that the most serious questions before us were brought to good solutions. Those which proved incapable of agreement at the conference have been relegated to the Foreign Secretary's Council, which, though most capable of relieving difficulties, is essentially one gifted with far less reaching powers. Other grave questions are left for the final peace settlement, by which time many of them may have settled themselves, not necessarily in the best way. It would be at once wrong and impossible to conceal the divergences of view which exist inevitably between the victors about the state of affairs in Eastern and Middle Europe. I do not at all blame the Prime Minister or the new Foreign Secretary, whose task it was to finish up the discussions which we had begun. I am sure they did their best. We have to realize that no one of the 3 leading powers can impose its solutions upon others, and that the only solutions possible are those which are in the nature of compromise. We British have had very early and increasingly to recognize the limitations of our own power and influence, great though it be, in the gaunt world arising from the ruins of this hideous war. It is not in the power of any British government to bring home solutions which would be regarded as perfect by the great majority of members of this House wherever they may sit. I must put on record my own opinion that the provisional western frontier agreed upon for Poland, running from Stettin on the Baltic along the Oder and its tributary, the western Neisse, comprising as it does 1/4 of the arable land of all Germany, is not a good augury for the future map of Europe. We always had in the coalition government a desire that Poland should receive an ample compensation in the west for the territory ceded to Russia east of the Curzon line. But here I think a mistake has been made, in which the provisional government of Poland have been an ardent partner, by going far beyond what necessity or equity required. There are few virtues that the Poles do not possess, and there are few mistakes they have ever avoided. I am particularly concerned at this moment with the reports reaching us that the conditions under which the expulsion and exodus of Germans from the New Poland are being carried out. Between 8 and 9 million persons dwelt in those regions before the war. The Polish government say there are still 1,500,000 of these, not yet expelled, within their new frontiers. Other millions must have taken refuge behind the British and American lines, thus increasing the food stringency in our sector. But enormous numbers are utterly unaccounted for. Where are they gone, and what has been their fate? The same conditions may reproduce themselves in a modified form in the expulsion of great numbers of Studenten and other Germans from Czechoslovakia. Sparse and guarded accounts of what has happened and what is happening have filtered through, but it is not impossible that tragedy on a prodigious scale is unfolding itself behind the Iron Curtain, which at this moment divides Europe in twain. I should welcome any statement which the Prime Minister can make which would relieve, or at least inform us upon this very anxious and grievous matter. There is another sphere of anxiety. I remember that a fortnight or so before the last war, the Kaiser's friend, Herr Ballin, the great shipping magnate, told me that he had heard Bismarck say, towards the end of his life, "If there is ever another war in Europe, it will come out of some damned silly thing in the Balkans." The murder of the Archduke of Sarajevo in 1914 set the signal for the First World War. I cannot conceive that the elements for a new conflict do not exist in the Balkans today. I am not using the language of Bismarck, but nevertheless not many members of the new House of Commons will be content with the new situation which prevails in those mountainous, turbulent, ill-organized, and warlike regions. I do not intend to particularize. I am very happy to see the new Foreign Secretary, Mr. Ernest Bevin, sitting on the front bench opposite. I should like to say with what gratification I learned that he had taken on this high and most profoundly difficult office, and we are sure he will do his best to preserve the great causes for which we have so long pulled together. But, as I say, not many members will be content with the situation in that region to which I have referred, for almost everywhere communist forces have obtained, or are in the process of obtaining, dictatorial powers. It does not mean that the communist system is everywhere being established, nor does it mean that Soviet Russia seeks to reduce all those independent states to provinces of the Soviet Union. Marshal Stalin is a very wise man, and I would set no limits to the immense contributions that he and his associates have to make to the future. In those countries torn and convulsed by war, there may be, for some months to come, the need of authoritarian government. The alternative would be anarchy. Therefore it would be unreasonable to ask or to expect that liberal government, as spelt with the small g, than British or United States democratic conditions, should be instituted immediately. They take their politics very seriously in those countries. A friend of mine, an officer, was in Zagreb when the results of the late general election came in. An old lady said to him, "Poor Mr. Churchill, I suppose now he will be shot." My friend was able to reassure her. He said the sentence might be mitigated to one of those various forms of hard labor which are always open to his Majesty's subjects. Nevertheless, we must know where we stand, and we must make clear where we stand in these affairs of the Balkans and of Eastern Europe, and indeed of any country which comes into this field. Our ideal is government of the people, by the people, for the people being free without duress to express, by secret ballot, without intimidation, their deep-seated wish as to the form and conditions of the government under which they are to live. At the present time, I trust a very fleeting time, police governments rule over a great number of countries. It is the case of the odious 18b, carried to a horrible excess. The family is gathered round the fireside to enjoy the scanty fruits of their toil and to recruit their exhausted strength by the little food that they have been able to gather. There they sit. Suddenly there is a knock at the door, and a heavily armed policeman appears. He is not, of course, one who resembles in any way those functionaries whom we honour and obey in the London streets. It may be that the father or son or friend sitting in the cottage is called out and taken off into the dark, and no one knows whether he will ever come back again, or what his fate has been. There are millions of humble homes in Europe at the moment, in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in Austria, in Hungary, in Yugoslavia, in Romania, in Bulgaria, where this fear is the main preoccupation of the family life. President Roosevelt laid down the 4 freedoms, and these are expressed in the Atlantic Charter which we agreed together. Freedom from fear, but this has been interpreted as if it were only freedom of fear of invasion from a foreign country. That is the least of fears to the common man. His patriotism arms him to withstand invasion or to go down fighting. But that is not the fear of the ordinary family in Europe tonight. Their fear is of the policeman's knock. It is not fear for the country, for all men can unite in comradeship for the defense of their native soil. It is for the life and liberty of the individual, for the fundamental rights of man, now menaced and precarious in so many lands that peoples tremble. Surely we can agree in this new Parliament, or the great majority of us, wherever we sit. There are naturally and rightly differences and cleavages of thought, but surely we can agree in this new Parliament, which will either fail the world or once again play a part in saving it, that it is the will of the people freely expressed by secret ballot in universal suffrage elections as to the form of their government and as to the laws which will prevail, which is the first solution and safeguard. Let us then march steadily along that plain and simple line. I avow my faith in democracy, whatever course or view it may take with individuals and parties. They may make their mistakes, and they may profit from their mistakes. Democracy is now on trial as it never was before, and in these islands we must uphold it, as we upheld it in the dark days of 1940 and 1941, with all our hearts, with all our vigilance, with all our enduring and inexhaustible strength. While the war was on, and all the allies were fighting for victory, the word democracy, like many people, had to work overtime. But now that peace has come, we must search for more precise definitions. Elections have been proposed in some of these Balkan countries, where only one set of candidates is allowed to appear, and where, if other parties are to express their opinion, it has to be arranged beforehand that the governing party, armed with its political police and all its propaganda, is the only one which has the slightest chance. Chance, did I say? It is a certainty. Now is the time for Britons to speak out. It is odious to us that governments should seek to maintain their rule otherwise than by free, unfettered elections by the mass of the people. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, says the Constitution of the United States. This must not evaporate in swindles and lies propped up by servitude and murder. In our foreign policy, let us strike continually the notes of freedom and fair play as we understand them in these islands. Then you will find these will be an overwhelming measure of agreement between us, and we shall in this house march forward on an honorable theme, having within it all that invests human life with dignity and happiness. In saying this, I have been trying to gather together and present in a direct form the things which, I believe, are dear to the great majority of us. I rejoiced to read them expressed in golden words by the President of the United States, when he said, "Our victory in Europe was more than a victory of arms. It was a victory of one way of life over another. It was a victory of an ideal founded on the rights of the common man, on the dignity of the human being, and on the conception of the state as the servant, not the master of the people." I think there is not such great disagreement between us. Emphasis may be cast this way or that in particular incidents, but surely this is what the new Parliament on the whole means, that this is what is in our heart and conscience in foreign affairs and world issues we desire. Just as in the baleful glare of 1940, so now when calmer lights shine, let us be united upon those resurgent principles and impulses of the good and generous hearts of men. Thus, to all the material strength we possess and the honored position we have acquired, we shall add these moral forces which glorify mankind, and make even the weakest equals of the strong. I turn now to the domestic sphere. I have already spoken of the enormous easement in their task which the new government have obtained through the swift and sudden ending of the Japanese War. What thousands and millions of pounds sterling are saved from the waste of war! What scores and hundreds of thousands of lives are saved! What vast numbers of ships are set free to carry the soldiers home to all their lands, to carry about the world the food and raw materials vital to industry! What noble opportunities have the new government inherited! Let them be worthy of their fortune, which is also the fortune of us all. To release and liberate the vital springs of British energy and inventiveness, to let the honest earnings of the nation fructify in the pockets of the people, to spread well-being and security against accident and misfortune throughout the whole nation, to plan, wherever state planning is imperative, to guide into fertile and healthy channels the native British genius for comprehension and goodwill. All these are open to them, and all these ought to be open to all of us now. I hope we may go forward together, not only abroad, but also at home, in all matters as far as we possibly can. During the period of the caretaker government, while we all still had to contemplate 18 months of strenuous war with Japan, we reviewed the plans for demobilization in such a way as to make a very great acceleration in the whole process of releasing men and women from the armed forces and from compulsory industrial employment. Now all that is overtaken by the worldwide end of the war, I may say at once that the paragraph of the gracious speech, the King's speech, outlining the new government's policy referring to demobilization and to the plans which were made in the autumn of 1944, with which I am in entire agreement in principle, gives a somewhat chilling impression. Now that we had this wonderful windfall, I am surprised that any government should imagine that language of this kind is still appropriate or equal to the new situation. I see that in the United States the President has said that all the American troops that the American ships can carry home in the next year will be brought home and set free. Are His Majesty's government now able to make any statement of that kind about our armed forces abroad? Or what statement can they make? I do not want to harass them unduly, but perhaps sometime next week some statement could be made. No doubt the Prime Minister will think of that. Great hopes have been raised in the electoral campaign, and from those hopes have sprung their great political victory. Time will show whether those hopes can be well founded, as we deeply trust they may be. But many decisions can be taken now, in the completely altered circumstance in which we find ourselves. The duty of the government is to fix the minimum numbers who must be retained in the next 6 or 12 months period in all the foreign theaters, and to bring the rest home with the utmost speed that our immensely expanding shipping resources will permit. Even more is this releasing process important in the demobilization of the home establishment. I quite agree with the feeling of the Class A men must be ever the dominant factor, but short of that, the most extreme efforts must be made to release people who are standing about doing nothing. I hope the Public Expenditure Committee will at once be reconstituted, and that they will travel about the country examining home establishments and reporting frequently to the House. Now that the war is over, there is no ground of military secrecy which may prevent the publication of the exact numerical ration strengths of our Army, Navy, and Air Force in every theater and at home, and we should have weekly, or at least monthly figures of the progressive demobilization effected. It is an opportunity for the new government to win distinction. At the end of the last war, when I was in charge of the Army and Air Force, I published periodically very precise information. I agree with the words used by the Foreign Secretary when he was Minister of Labour in my administration, namely, that the tremendous winding up process of the war must be followed by a methodical and regulated unwinding. We agree that if the process is to be pressed forward with the utmost speed, it is necessary for the government to wield exceptional powers for the time being, or so long as they use those powers to achieve the great administrative and executive tasks imposed upon them, we shall not attack them. It is only if, and in so far as, those powers are used to bring about by a side wind a state of controlled society agreeable to socialist doctrinaires, but which we deem odious to British freedom, that we shall be forced to resist them. As long as the exceptional powers are used as part of the war emergency, His Majesty's government may consider us as helpers, and not as opponents, as friends, and not as foes. To say this in no way relieves the government of their duty to set the nation free as soon as possible, to bring home the soldiers in accordance with the scheme with the utmost rapidity, and to enable the mass of the people to resume their normal lives and employment in the best, easiest, and speediest manner. There ought not to be a long, dragged-out period of many months when hundreds of thousands of service men and women are kept waiting about under discipline, doing useless tasks at the public expense, and other tens of thousands more highly paid, finding them sterile work to do. What we desire is freedom. What we need is abundance. Freedom and abundance. These must be our aims. The production of new wealth is far more beneficial and of an incomparably larger scale than class and party fights about the liquidation of old wealth. We must try to share blessings and not miseries. The production of new wealth must precede common wealth. Otherwise there will be only a common poverty. I am sorry these simple truisms must excite the honourable member opposite, whom I watched so often during the course of the last Parliament, and whose many agreeable qualities I have often admired, as if they had some sense of novelty for him. We do not propose to join issue immediately about the legislative proposals in the gracious speech. We do not know what is meant by the control of investment, but apparently it is the subject for mirth. Evidently in war you may do one thing, in peace perhaps another must be considered. Allowance must be made for the transitional period through which we are passing. The debate on the address should probe and elicit the government's intentions in this matter. The same is true of the proposal to nationalize the coal mines. If that is really the best way of securing a larger supply of coal at a cheaper price, and at an earlier moment than is now in view, I for one should approach the plan in a sympathetic spirit. It is by results that the government will be judged, and it is by results that this policy must be judged. The national ownership of the Bank of England does not, in my opinion, raise any matter of principle. I give my opinion. Anybody else may give his own. There are important examples in the United States and in our dominions of central banking institutions. But what matters is the use to be made of this public ownership. On this we must wait the detailed statement by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, whom, I am glad to say, has pledged himself to resist inflation. Meanwhile, it may be helpful for me to express the opinion, as leader of the opposition, that foreign countries need not be alarmed by the language of the gracious speech on this subject, and that British credit will be resolutely upheld. Then there is the Trade Disputes Act. We are told that this is to be repealed. Personally, I feel that we owe an inestimable debt to the trade unions for all they have done for the country in the long struggle against the foreign foe. But they would surely be unwise to reinstitute the political levy on the old basis. It would be very odd if they wished to regain full faculties for legalizing and organizing a general strike. It does not say much for the confidence with which the Trade Union Council view the brave new world, or for what they think about the progressive nationalization of our industries, that they should deem it necessary, on what an honourable and gallant gentleman called the D-Day of the New Britain, to restore and sharpen the general strike weapon at this particular time of all others. Apparently nationalization is not regarded by them as any security against conditions which would render a general strike imperative and justified in the interest of the workers. We are, I understand, after nationalizing the coal mines, to deal with the railways, electricity, and transport. Yet, at the same time, the trade unions feel it necessary to be heavily rearmed against state socialism. Apparently, the new age is not to be so happy for the wage earners as we have been asked to believe. At any rate, there seems to be a fundamental incongruity in these conceptions to which the attention of the socialist intelligentsia should be speedily directed. Perhaps it may be said that these powers will only be needed if the Tories come into office. Surely these are early days to get frightened. I will ask the Prime Minister if he will tell us broadly what is meant by the word repeal. I have offered these comments to the House, and I do not wish to end on a sombre or even slightly controversial note. As to the situation which exists today, it is evident that not only are the two parties in the House agreed in the main essentials of foreign policy and in our moral outlook on world affairs, but we also have an immense program prepared by the joint exertions during the coalition, which requires to be brought into law, and made an inherent part of the life of the people. Here and there may be differences of emphasis and view, but in the main, no parliament ever assembled with such a mass of agreed legislation as lies before us. I have great hopes of this parliament, and I shall do my utmost to make its work fruitful. It may heal the wounds of war, and to turn to good account the new conceptions and powers which we have gathered amid the storm. I do not underrate the difficult and intricate complications of the task which lies before us. I know too much about it to cherish vain illusions. But the morrow of such a victory as we have gained is a splendid moment in both our small lives and in our great history. It is a time not only of rejoicing, but even more of resolve. When we look back on all the perils through which we have passed, and at the mighty foes we have laid low, and all the dark and deadly designs we have frustrated, why should we fear for our future? We have come safely through the worst. Home is the sailor, home from sea, and the hunter home from the hill. End of speech.